Anyway, 8:50 this morning. Ronan Mullen, good morning to you. How are you?
All good, lads. How are things?
My abiding memory from the second Fury-Wilder fight was the aftermath, where Deontay Wilder blamed the very heavy robot suit that he wore into the ring for his tiredness and fatigue, and that was the reason that he lost the fight. Maybe there was something in that. He certainly put in a better performance in the third of the trilogy. Is that fair to say, that actually he put in a quite a brilliant performance, and that's what has driven this fight into the stratosphere in terms of how people are viewing it?
Yeah, I think if you look at his resume in terms of fighters he's actually beaten, it's fairly thin, and if anything, I'd say he probably gained more in defeat there at the weekend than he had in many of his title defences, because, as you said, such a spirited effort, and off the back of a conclusive loss in the second fight. And, you know, trilogies are built on competition in the sense that it's a to and fro type dynamic. Like, Fury outboxed Wilder clearly in the first fight, destroyed him, outfought him in the second fight. So you're just figuring the third fight's going to follow a similar pattern. People would have noticed a slight tweak in Wilder's tactics. In the first round, he probably threw more body shots than he threw in his whole career. But once Fury got on top, Wilder more or less reverted to type. And you kind of figured once Fury put him down in the third round, that's curtains. It's going to end around the midpoint and Fury's going to coast to another victory. But when the chips were down, Wilder pulled out that eraser, and the right hand he threw to knock Fury down, it was obviously a bit of a delayed reaction, but he caught him right on the forehead, which is probably the sorest part of anyone's body to actually punch. And that just shows you the reverberations that Wilder was able to put through Fury's body, that it took him a couple of seconds almost to hit the deck. Then Fury went down again, and you're thinking, geez, this is actually going to be an upset for the ages. But then I think you have to, as much as we're giving Wilder credit here, Fury's powers of recovery to basically come out after the fourth round and boss proceedings to the finish was incredible. And he's talking about being the best heavyweight of the era. I think that's irrefutable at this point. It's where we're going to sort of lodge him in the all-time pantheon, and that's going to be an interesting case study once his career wraps up.
How technically impressive was the fight, Ronan? Because there's certainly no debate about the drama in the fight.
Yeah, I was saying to you a couple of weeks ago, obviously, Usyk, Joshua, I really enjoyed that fight because it was high-level boxing in the heavyweight division, which is something you don't typically see. It's, two Olympic gold medalists almost trying to out-fence each other, and obviously a bit of brute force in there as well, given the weight that's in the ring. But the fight on Saturday night was more mania. It was the technique almost went out the window, but there were obviously key moments where Fury's almost peerless boxing skills you probably haven't seen in the heavyweight division before for a man of that size. That was ultimately the difference, where we talk about Wilder fatiguing. On this instance, he fatigued a bit. Number one, because he was carrying more muscle than he typically would. He put on a bit of weight to try and live with Fury physically, which is probably a fool's errand in my opinion. Wilder should basically have gone to the party with what got him there, and he tweaked things up a bit too much in that regard. Then the other thing was Fury was making him miss so much, and boxers don't practice missing shots, and you can imagine Wilder's loading up, and by the time he throws the shot, Fury's out of dodge, and that happened repeatedly. So that was borne out in the fact that Wilder was fatiguing in the latter half of the fight. So those were the little technical nuances that swayed the thing Fury's favour. But in the end, it was ultimately Fury leaning on Wilder on the inside, a little bit of roughhouse tactics. The referee warned him a couple of times for putting him in a headlock and these kinds of things, but Fury was right on the edge in that department and ultimately closed the show in dramatic fashion. And those are the kind of showreel knockouts that heavyweight division is famous for. And I think if anything, Fury's been a household name for a long time, but I think that win almost made him a crossover star. So it's going to be interesting to see how he's built from here.
Where do you put him in the pantheon at the moment? Where's he trending towards?
Yeah, it's just about hunger, really, isn't it? Because he walked away once before, and you couldn't really blame him for walking away again, because short of Anthony Joshua, there aren't that many appealing fights left on the table. That fight is obviously still appealing, would pack out any stadium in Britain and probably break every pay-per-view record known to man. But the intrigue as a competitive contest has probably dwindled, unless Joshua can somehow turn the tables on Usyk and that becomes a redemption arc, and then that fight actually becomes massive again. But Fury went to, I think his most impressive win, and maybe the most impressive win of this century, is when Fury went to Germany and beat quote-unquote prime Vladimir Klitschko, certainly a dominant Klitschko at that time, in his own backyard as a rank underdog, like hadn't really boxed anyone to that level, and went and outboxed the best boxer of the era in his own backyard. So that kind of put him in that rarefied air. Obviously, it's well documented the gap in his career, the couple of years he took out, and the way he's come back from that. And the first Wilder, I'm going to call it a win. It was ruled a draw, but he conclusively outboxed Wilder that first night. When he looked in bad condition, it looked like he took the fight way too soon. And on his worst night, he stifled probably the biggest puncher in the history of the heavyweight division, then beat him again, and then beat him again. So, like, it's pretty difficult to put these kinds of things in context in terms of all-time great trilogies, but it does feel like the bitter rivalry outside the ring. You mentioned the thing about the costume, but barbs back and forth, the insinuation that there was foul play, all these kinds of things, you know, kind of built it up, and you can actually see the 30 for 30 or whatever it is. It's going to get that kind of treatment in a few years when we get a bit of time and appreciate this was actually an all-time great fight that just went on. And then in broader context, the fact that Wilder put Fury down several times across the trilogy but wasn't able to get the job done. So.
Yeah. Did Fury benefit from the refereeing at the end of the second knockdown? I mean,
yeah, I heard Andrea Ward making this point that it's a 10 count. That doesn't necessarily mean 10 seconds. It just means.
Why does it not mean 10 seconds? I don't understand. I know. That. Why does it not mean 10 seconds? Because
there should be a stopwatch at the side of the ring, but instead there's a referee outside the ring and starts the count immediately as soon as the fighter hits the canvas, and then the referee basically checks in with that guy and picks up the count from there.
Yeah, and then afterwards he's like, "Oh, we're gonna wipe the gloves. Come on, put your hands up, hurry up.
Let's get you to the bell." In that case, actually,
which is exactly what happens.
Yeah,
there was an instance where I think Wilder you're obviously supposed to go to a neutral corner as the aggressor in that instance, so the fighter who knocked the other fighter down has to go to a neutral corner rather than his own. Wilder was sort of ambling around, and the referee told him basically get back to the neutral corner, but then continued his count from where he was. So that was another maybe 2 or 3 seconds lost that Fury got to recoup. And that was obviously much was made of that in the first fight, where I know lots of Wilder stands were putting up videos with stopwatches beside it, where the one where Fury did the Undertaker sit up after he looked like
3.5 minutes later.
Yeah. So no, there's definitely something in it, but I think in the grand scheme of things, Fury would have found a way to win the fight regardless. I think, granted, if it happened so late in the round, if Wilder had another minute and Fury had to navigate that, it would have been a different story. But I think he is enough savvy to probably get to the bell in that situation.
Well, Owen was making the point that he would happily watch a fourth fight. Is there a way back for Wilder to get I mean, you've already said that you think his standing has improved in defeat. Is there a way back for him to get the fourth fight? There's probably no point from Fury's perspective beyond the ridiculous amounts of money, and he says he's not motivated by money, but maybe at the end when he's beaten whatever else there is to beat, he decides that there is a cash-in fight, a fourth one.
Yeah, well, it seems like his ESPN deal is coming to a close, so he's obviously had this basically showreel spell in the States, so I presume once this ESPN deal runs out, he's going to have a homecoming fight in the UK, and we might get to it in a moment, but Dillian Whyte is his mandatory challenger, so that seems like a no-brainer. Do that at Old Trafford. It's going to be a brilliant event. But in terms of Wilder, he's in his mid-30s now, which is not old for a heavyweight by any means, but he's taken a lot of punishment in these last couple of fights, more punishment than he had previously, where he would probably get outboxed a bit in other fights, but didn't take the sort of sustained beating that Fury was giving him. But there definitely is a route back for Wilder. He's a marquee attraction. It's just whether he has the hunger for it. And like the top 5 heavyweights at the moment, there's just a cool little round robin that could be done. You could put anyone in with anyone, and it's gonna sell. And I mentioned the Floyd Mayweather impact on boxing of my generation, or fans of this generation, that if you lose a fight, it seemed like, you know, the end of the world. But it's really not the case. Like, I remember myself and Owen did the Classic Game Club on LaMotta against Sugar Ray Robinson. I think they fought 6 times. LaMotta won one of them. But that doesn't mean people weren't coming through the turnstiles in big numbers and watching that fight, because they just meshed so well. So to your point, I think Fury's probably thinking, been there, done that. But if Wilder can reposition himself to the top of the table, and he's really not that far from there, I could see it happening again for sure.
What's your order on that round robin then? Obviously, Tyson Fury's number 1.
Yeah, well, I think the top 4 are probably beyond dispute at this point. So you're looking at Tyson Fury number 1. You have to put Usyk number 2. I'd still have probably Joshua number 3 and then Wilder number 4. But that 3 and 4, it's pretty much up to yourself. As a bridging fighter who's really like been banging on the door for years at this point, Dillian Whyte would be a strong number 5. After that, the quality dips a little bit, and it's kind of who you're having yourself in terms of like Joseph Parker and Derek Chisora fighting at the end of the year. I don't think anyone would be putting them in that kind of echelon of top fighters, but they're the kind of lads who could move themselves back into a world title fight at least. But in terms of that top 5, I think you can put anyone with anyone, and it's going to be intriguing. So hopefully Fury does stick around, and that's all borne out, because it'd be a shame if the Fury-Joshua fight passes by. Similarly, I think we all would love to see Joshua against Wilder be an absolute shootout. You just have to, there'll be no boiling the kettle in the middle of that fight. You just have to keep your eyes trained on it, because it could end at any moment with those punchers.
Dillian Whyte, obviously, a lot of people will remember Alexander Povetkin knocking him out. Whyte recovers to avenge that. Is Whyte... Is that just a waste of time for Tyson Fury, given how few fights he's going to have left at the end of his career? Or do you just do that and it's fine? It's, maybe it's a 12-round slugfest and he just kind of leans on him for the 12 rounds and he just gets out. Or maybe he stops it 5 rounds in. I don't know. Like, if you're managing his career at this point and you're looking at the paydays and you're looking at history, do you need to take these fights?
Well, if I was advising Dillian Whyte for one, I would tell him he has a fight at the end of this month and there's absolutely nothing to be gained from it, because he's mandatory challenger, number 1 contender, nailed on, and we don't have to get into the politics of it, but it's taken him ages to get into this position where the fight has been ordered. You mentioned Povetkin. He was mandatory challenger then, took a fight against Povetkin that he didn't need to, got knocked spark out and had to climb the ladder again. So something similar could happen against Otto Wallen later this month, which is he's a decent operator and probably more of a challenge than Whyte needs. I understand he doesn't want to jump in against Fury with so much inactivity, but if I was to, just maybe pick up a niggle, and just box somebody in December.
I've got COVID.
Yes. Box a lower contender in December or something to get ready for the Fury fight in March or whatever it's going to be. To Fury's end, I think Fury has earned a bit of a step down in quality, and Whyte isn't necessarily that. I rate him as a boxer. He's just probably not on the level of a Tyson Fury, but who is really realistically at the moment.
They're terrible fights to take though, aren't they? Because you're like, this guy's a little bit below me. I can not train as hard as I need to. Do you know, I can see the danger from Fury's perspective.
Yeah, probably looking down on Whyte ever so slightly, but Whyte is good enough to punish you for that as well. He's got a brilliant left hook and all these kinds of things, so he's very dangerous in these kinds of fights. I just think it'd be brilliant, because Whyte's an amazing talker, great salesman, and as I said, if you had that at Old Trafford, and Fury's been talking about fighting there, he's also been talking about fighting in the Viva Stadium, as Phil mentioned there a few weeks ago, that Fury flagged that up, I think, after a Six Nations game a while back. That's probably not going to happen at this point, but I think Old Trafford, whereas Joshua has done amazing things in packing out stadiums in London and the Millennium Stadium and broken all sorts of gate receipts in the UK, Fury's probably never won that love from the UK public quite yet. He wasn't sold properly from the beginning. He had a bit of promotional mishaps, but now he's got the power of Top Rank, Bob Arum behind him. Frank Warren is promoting him as well. So I think it's only a matter of time before he comes back to the UK and gets that homecoming. And Whyte, it's a no-brainer of an opponent, another UK fighter, and it would sell pretty easily, and I'm sure the likes of BT and Sky would be bidding big money for it.
Is there a chance Fury just walks away when we don't expect him to?
I think there is a good chance he could step away. I'm definitely not ruling that out, but you always get the sense with Fury that he could come back. If he took a couple of years off and came back, won all the belts back again, I think that's very feasible. But he's so close to becoming undisputed champion now. All he has to do is beat Usyk, and then he's got all the belts, and that hasn't been done in such a long time. So he was so close to that before when he beat Klitschko and then gave up all the belts. So I can't see him foregoing that opportunity again. Him against Usyk, on paper, you're probably thinking it's not the most enticing fight, but with that undisputed tag and the sort of spectacular ramifications of where that puts you in boxing history, if you can clear out the division, I think he probably would take that. But Usyk has the Joshua fight to navigate. It's not a gimme by any means, but judging off his last performance, I think Usyk's a firm number 2 in this division. So 1 against 2, you can't ask for better than that in the heavyweight division. I think you'd have to say it's alive and well after the Klitschko stranglehold. They were 2 brilliant boxers, but didn't fight each other, and that kind of just had a bit of a stalemate for the best part of a decade. So at least now the lads are looking like they're keen to fight one another. Yeah.
Last one for me from this is the whole spectre of sports washing. It's been something we've been talking about on the show for a long period of time. It doesn't seem as if MTK's connections to Fury and Fury's public endorsement of Daniel Kinahan has had any impact on his ability to get or organise these big fights. It was a short story in the UK media for a period of time when the panorama came out, but it seems not to have been mentioned in dispatches at all just recently.
No, it's true, and like the MTK thing, I think is probably going to re-emerge to the fore because their emergence in boxing and their dominance within the sport is becoming more multifaceted. Like they've got more different strands that aren't necessarily under the MTK banner, which is almost a little bit more worrying that they're probably operating within the sport without sort of clear marketing or anything like that. The fact that basically no card goes by without some sort of MTK influence. And from the boxer's point of view, like lads in the UK are probably disassociated from the story, signed with MTK without really knowing the ins and outs of the whole thing. And MTK have just so much money to throw at the project that these guys are getting guaranteed money that they've never seen before. So from the boxer's point of view, it's understandable. The fact that journalists aren't calling it out in these instances, like I suppose in the grand, like the sweep up of the hype around the fight itself, you can kind of understand it. But in terms of broader context, the fact that it hasn't really been flagged whatsoever, given that Daniel Kinahan had been flagged specifically for brokering the Joshua Fury fight, which ultimately fell apart, I think, it was pretty clear that he was still a central figure in the whole thing. And the fact that that fight fell apart doesn't mean that he wasn't key to making Wilder against Fury again. So, yeah, it's a bit disappointing probably that it hasn't garnered the sort of exposure that it did after the Panorama documentary. But as we've touched on the show before, like similarly with Newcastle, once Newcastle starts signing Anthony Martial or Jesse Lingard, these kinds of guys, I can't imagine the Saudi Arabian stuff is going to be getting too much play in the UK media or the Newcastle media specifically. So it's one to keep an eye on. The MTK stuff's definitely not going away, and if anything, it's evolving in different areas. So I think the story will re-emerge, but how soon it re-emerges, we'll have to keep an eye on.
All right, we talked to Nicola Tallant on the show just recently. You can get that full interview on our YouTube channel. Of course, you can get it on our podcast network. Just subscribe to OTB Highlights. You'll get that. That's where you'll get this podcast or interview with Ronan as well. If you just joined us, you missed it. We've been talking about the heavyweight division. Ronan Mullen, thanks very much for that.